Friends, as we look at this passage, there are 3 points I'd like to share. First, the darkness. Now, darkness was mentioned frequently throughout the events leading to Jesus' death. And he was betrayed and he was arrested during the night. And even while he was crucified on a cross during midday, the passage says darkness descended upon the land for 3 hours. This was a supernatural event, but more importantly, this was a sign of God's displeasure, of God's judgment. Exodus chapter 10 recorded a similar event of darkness covering the day in one of God's plague of judgment against the Egyptians. And so in this passage, God's judgment and wrath has come upon Christ as he hung on the cross to die. However, it wasn't only physical pain that Jesus suffered. When the darkness of judgment descended upon him, Jesus experienced total disorientation and total isolation from his Father. He was totally forsaken by his Father, whom he had infinite and perfect relationship from all eternity. Think about that. You can tell the closeness of their relationship by the cry of Jesus when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" You can't call my God without having a relationship with God. And Jesus had that perfect relationship. And that's why he could cry out to his God, my God, my God. Why did Jesus have to bear God's displeasure, to bear the darkness of God's judgment upon him when he absolutely did nothing wrong to justify that? This is a good question that we have to ask ourselves. It was his love. The Bible said it was his love for his people that he couldn't stand to see them living in darkness or in spiritual darkness, which is sin. Jesus, the light of the world, came into this world to bear the darkness we experience. The darkness of disorientation from searching for wrong things that doesn't truly satisfy us. The darkness of isolation from the insecurities of placing hope in the wrong things. The darkness of destruction because of the path that these wrong things will ultimately lead us. So, we see here, Jesus came into this world to bear all these darkness for us so that we won't have to live in darkness anymore and experience the light of his life that he brings. And so this is the darkness. Second point, the veil. When Jesus died on the cross, the curtain of the temple was torn into two. The curtain of the temple was there to separate man from God. And once a year, only a high priest can enter to offer sacrifices for the sins of the people so that they could receive forgiveness from God. And as such, when Jesus died, the curtain was removed because Jesus' death signaled the ultimate sacrifice that was made for sin once and for all. And through his sacrifice, we can now approach God. Not only can we approach him, we can now have a relationship with God. The darkness that was hovering over us prevented us from coming to God. But Jesus took that darkness and stood between us and God and removed it for us. Now that the barrier is removed, all signs point to us being able to come in, being able to welcome into the relationship with God. Instead of this sign, do not enter, we can now access God. We can now come in. And Mark, in this passage, invites us to receive this invitation from Jesus. Mark wants us to see this clearly. He calls us to come to Jesus when the barrier has been removed for us. And third point, the confession. So far, we've seen the condition we have that Jesus dealt for us and the invitation he extends to us. Now Mark shows us the kind of response that Jesus deserves for what he did for us. You know, immediately after the curtain was torn in two, Mark shows us the first person to respond to Jesus was the Roman centurion. Now, this Roman centurion was an outsider, you know, a Gentile that was not part of the Jewish community. You know, centurion saw Jesus suffering and heard his cry of anguish, and he responded with faith. You know, to many, he was the most unlikely person to respond in such a manner. If you think about it, you know, he was an outsider. He was not part of the covenant community of God's people. But yet, when he saw Jesus hung on a cross, he heard his cry. He believed. He trusted in faith. You know, for some people, this is the most unlikely thing to happen to a person. Why? If you think about this, you know, this Roman centurion was the enemy of Jesus. You know, he participated in persecuting Jesus. And then, just like many of the other people, he did not know Jesus or his teachings before. He wasn't part of the community. But yet, he was captured by the beauty of Jesus' darkness, Jesus being hung on the cross for his people. And that's why he said, when he saw Jesus' death, he said, "Truly, this is the Son of God." This is the beauty of the gospel that God offered to all people who would come to him. This is the beauty of God's salvation through the death of Christ that is given to all kinds of people, even to the most unlikely person that you can think of. You know, salvation wasn't given to only those who were born in a Christian family or the so-called good people who abide by rules. No, it is given to all sinners, you know, to murderers, adulterers, liars, and cheaters. And a barrier has been taken down so that anyone who confesses that Jesus Christ is Lord will be saved and receive life. This is the good news of the gospel, my friends. And so I have a question for you then. Will you accept his invitation of grace as he's extending to you right now? Or perhaps a better question we can ask is, will you look to Jesus, the conqueror of darkness, the light of the world, as your only Savior?